I am the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA, and I'm so happy to welcome you to this afternoon's MEFA webinar, Preparing High School Students for College Success. So I am thrilled to briefly introduce the expert panel that we have today, and they are going to have lots to share with you and are going to be able to answer a lot of your questions. So let's just go through a little bit of housekeeping and then I will introduce them. You have some control over your experience of this webinar, so you can move the audio settings as you can see on the screen. You can use the chat and or the question and answer section, and I will look at both, but the chat will only come to me and the panelists, and the Q&A as well. And I will be reading those and taking in your questions and asking them of the panelists as we go along. That might be easier than using the raise hand because, you know, on a Zoom, there's a lot to do. So I would really encourage you to type into the chat or the Q&A. And then if you would like closed captioning, you can press the CC button on your screen to receive a live transcript of the words that are spoken. And then you can also click leave if you need to exit. And we will be recording this and emailing it to you tomorrow. So you'll have it to refer back to or share. All right, so let me introduce our panelists. We have Caitlin Koretka, who is the Access Advisor for Disability Services at Westfield State University. We have Sarah Lazar, who is Director of the Bonacos. Is that how you say that?
Bonacos.
Bonacos. Thank you. Bonacos Academic Center at Westfield State University. And we have Cindy McDonald, who is the Associate Director of Academic Support and Disability Resources at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, known as MCLA. We have Mary Rubenis, who works with me at MEFA and is Associate Director of the Attainable Outreach Program and all education around that. And Jenna Shales, Associate Director of Student Accessibility Services at Bridgewater State University. So welcome to all of you panelists and welcome participants, and let's have a terrific conversation here. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary.
Mute myself. Thanks, Julie. I'm going to start sharing these slides in the beginning. There we go. Okay. So Julie just went through this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. My name is Mary Rubenis, and I work for MEFA, and I'm going to share a short couple of slides about Attainable, which is the ABLE Savings Plan. It's a savings vehicle for someone with a disability to save without it affecting benefits if they receive them. MEFA is the state sponsor, and Fidelity is our program manager. So if you open one of these, you do it through Fidelity. Because this webinar ties into the disability space, we thought it was a great opportunity, and MEFA's mission actually of planning, paying, and saving for college. We thought it was great to be able to share a little bit about Attainable and how it intersects as well within this space, within our mission. And so just to share a little history about the ABLE Act, which was federally legislated back in 2014. And so the acronym stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience, or ABLE Act, and it amended the federal tax code to add this section 529A, which is an ABLE account. And these ABLE accounts are a tax-exempt account for an eligible individual with a disability to use it for qualified disability expenses and still keep your eligibility for federal public benefits like SSI. So huge deal for these to come about. And MEFA launched Attainable back in 2017. And federally, like I said, 2014, this was passed. So just one slide to give you a brief overview. Eligibility for an ABLE account or an Attainable account, the disability has to have occurred prior to the age of 26. And then if you receive SSI or SSDI, you're automatically eligible. Or the disability occurs prior to the age of 26, you have some type of mental health intellectual, developmental, physical disability that would qualify based on Social Security standards, you're eligible to open an ABLE account. Some of the qualified expenses include things like healthcare, housing, you can use it to pay your rent, educational expenses, so that really ties into what we're talking about today. Transportation, not only buying a car, but that also includes Uber and Lyft. So if you're taking those qualify as well. Assistive technology, and then lastly, basic living expenses. So things like food, clothing qualify under an ABLE account. The one big benefit to having one of these is that it allows the account owner or the beneficiary to save over $2,000 without affecting those federal benefits if they receive them. And that's a really big benefit to have, because currently, unless you have an ABLE account or a special needs trust, you can't save over that $2,000 cap if you get those benefits. Anyone can contribute to one of these attainable accounts, family, friends, obviously the person with the disability. It's really providing financial independence, and there are multiple tax benefits. I won't go through them all here, but essentially the earnings that you're making in this account are federal income tax free, and also for Massachusetts residents, state income tax free as well. There's some tax credits that you can take that come along with these. You can roll over from a regular 529 into an ABLE account, into a 529A, up to a certain cap in a calendar year. So multiple tax benefits. If you want to learn more, ABLE National Resource Center, or ablenrc.org, is a phenomenal site to go to learn more. They do a ton of webinars. They compare plans. There's just a lot of information there. So highly recommend you go there. Also, of course, on the MEFA site, we have a dedicated landing page for Attainable, where we obviously share the ins and outs of the program, and also local resources as well. And that's on MEFA.org. And then lastly, if you're interested in learning more to open one of these, you go to fidelity.com/able to open an Attainable account. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Lazar to start her presentation on best practices to kind of prepare your student for college.
Great, thank you so much, Mary. I might have to look into one of those accounts for my kids. So today, I find it really important that parents do know, and that students do know the differences between high school and college, and preparing yourself earlier rather than later for that. So we are going to look at college level work and transition, the crucial role of parents, disability and accessibility, the ability services, reasonable accommodations, and college search considerations. So next, please. So first, the college level work. In college, all students are expected to think. Can you go back one, please? Think. There you go. So everybody's expected to think and consider information more deeply than in high school. You have to do more work. You have to learn new concepts and apply them to different situations. In high school, you often just have to memorize. All students are held to the same standards and expectations, which is very important. All students expected to study 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every credit hour in class. So that could mean 30 to 45 hours of studying on top of maybe 15 hours of class. That's a lot of time. Tests are less frequent and often cover more information. So studying frequently is very important. And assignments must be handed in on time. Extra credit or makeup work is often not offered, which is really important when planning, and assigned materials are not always reviewed in class or appear on the test. Transitioning to college level support, this can be very challenging, one of the most challenging aspects of going to college. So in K through 12, the IDEA provides for IEPs that are designed to have the student succeed. There's normally a team approach to support the student in learning and organizing their information. They often have altered or lowered expectations and standards of performance. Study guides and visual planners are often provided, and there are retakes of exams, shortened assignments and tests, unlimited time on tests, explanation of test questions. I mention all of these things because almost all of them do not happen in college. So students need to learn how to take an exam once, prepare for it enough so that they can take it. They need to start doing things like writing the full assignment that the other students are writing. This is in high school, definitely should be doing that. Time is going to be limited. It's normally 50% or 100% of time. And when you have a reader for an exam, they do not explain the test questions. We often get asked that and often told, no, I don't want a reader for an exam if they're not going to, help me think through the answer. So, because that does not happen. A student must perform on an individualized basis. In college, the ADA and Section 504 are there to provide access and to level the playing field. Students will talk with about their disabilities and request reasonable accommodations with disability or accessibility services alone. Standards and expectations are the same for all students. There are no shortened exams, no shortened homeworks. Students will independently access services. They will look for tutoring, organizational support if it's available at that school, and attend classes on their own. This is important because parents have been so involved in the lives of their students, but as they become your adult child, it's time for them to start thinking about that transition, to start weaning themselves off of modifications that require them to do less work and start advocating for themselves now. Next, please. So parents are and do remain crucial. Your role differs from that in high school. And I say this again to put some emphasis behind it. To be successful, students must independently access university resources. But you can help in different ways. So you can encourage your students to become independent. You can act as a coach for your adult child. Don't do things for them. Don't, scroll for them or click on that link, but you might be there with them to start. Hold the pinky instead of the hand. Know the resources at your adult child's college and refer students to them for papers, tutoring, other academic support. I often see students go to their parent to ask a question and the parent tries to find the answer. But if you already know that there is a tutoring program, that students like, there aren't any tutors, then you can just remind them, just go to the search bar, type in tutor and see what comes up. Just very basic direction like that can be so helpful, and it shows the student that they can do it and they need to be able to do it. They're going to be adult children and they're going to be adults. So that it's important to direct them as opposed to do things for them. And then encourage students to share their experiences and progress with you, because the school cannot, the university cannot. There are privacy laws involved. So creating a relationship where you can share information is going to be helpful. The different types of services that are offered at disability or accessibility services offices and universities. We provide a wide array of reasonable, appropriate accommodations for students with learning, physical, psychological, or medical challenges. We provide support for negotiating with professors where appropriate. Sometimes there are questions. Professor might not feel that this is appropriate for their class. They might think it interferes with what they're teaching. So we can help students talk through that. And students need to tell us that that's going on in order for us to help them. We provide referrals to other supports on campus, and there are many. Students are expected to register with the office and request their own accommodations. Normally what we do is that if a parent comes along for a meeting, we talk with the student first, and then we allow the parent in afterwards so they can ask their questions. But it's so important that the student guide what's going on. And students must provide current documentation of their medical or mental health conditions for determination of a disability. So the current documentation normally is for, let's say, for a neuropsychological assessment, educational evaluation, that would be about 3 years. For something that is going to continue and not change, we would want something from after they've matured some, and an explanation that this is going to not change. For medical and mental health, normally we ask for something that is within a year, sometimes 6 months, but 6 months to a year, because many of those conditions will change. Next slide, please. When we look at reasonable accommodations, which might have been called modifications at the K through 12 level, we look at them on an individualized basis. We talk with the student and we review the supporting documentation. It's really important that students also know what their documentation says. So we encourage students to learn that and start reading through it. Very important to know that an IEP does not follow a student. A 504 plan does not follow a student to college. We do a reassessment. We have different standards and expectations. So some of the modifications they got in high school are not going to be appropriate for the college level. So we reassess. And then also, we also find often that we have accommodations that students have never had. So for example, the electronic text, having a screen reader, using Kurzweil 3000. A lot of students have used Read and Write Gold, but to have a text read to them, it takes away the clutter, takes away, you know, that extra cognitive load that they have to go through to get that information into their head. So we talk to them about that and ask them to try it out. Also very important is that professors only know the accommodations. They don't know the underlying conditions. It's not their business what is going on with a student. In some cases, it is important to share. However, for the most part, the professor doesn't need to know what it is. Other accommodations, very common ones would be exam accommodations, having extended time, readers, scribes. Scribes are people who write out the exam, what the student says for the exam, answers word for word. They do not check for grammar or anything like that. Using a computer or laptop, having remote proctoring, all those sorts of things. Note-taking assistance for classes, which can take a variety of forms. That could be something like having a note taker, but it also could be recording the class. And that's the kind of discussion that the student would have with the provider of accommodations in disability services or accessibility services. There might need to be housing accommodation. A student for a medical reason normally might need to have a leniency with tardiness and attendance. Extended deadlines or assignments early is something that a lot of people don't give extended deadlines as an accommodation. It would be reserved for very extreme situations, but maybe you can get that assignment early so that you can plan out how to get it done on time. Another thing that's very important is that there should never, ever be any costs for approved accommodations. Student doesn't pay for the approved accommodations. However, if you have personal services, such as like a smart pen, if you have a PCA, you will have to pay for those. And there's like a whole long thing on the Department of Ed's website about personal services or personal assistance. Next, please. When you're looking at colleges, contact the Disability Accessibility Office. You should know when you're applying that we are not allowed to disclose an applicant's disability to admissions. A student can do that on their own. That's fine. That's their business, basically. But we are not allowed to disclose that. So we don't tell. You call my office, I'm not telling admissions that you called. Most offices are happy to discuss what might be available to a student. And that's with the supporting documentation. Otherwise, everything is hypothetical. If you have this, then you might get that sort of accommodation. Most websites explain what might be available to students or commonly used accommodation, so check out that website. And they also include documentation guidelines or forms for medical and mental health practitioners to fill out. So if you are about to go to college, you can get that process started now. Next, please. In Massachusetts, for the Massachusetts universities, most universities are now not requiring the SAT or the ACT scores. So you're going to have to check with each school. However, if it does require the SAT or ACT, then a student with a professionally diagnosed and documented learning disability, and there needs to be the documentation of a diagnostic test results, are exempt from taking standardized tests for admission. Okay, these applicants must complete all required academic courses and earn a minimum average GPA of 3.0 or present other evidence of your potential for academic success. There is also a waiver of the foreign language. It's actually a substitution. So if an applicant has a specific diagnosis of a learning disability that affects their ability to learn a foreign language, and the documentation must have been submitted to the high school, the college is probably going to request that too, then they can substitute 2 academic electives for those foreign language courses. So that is something to prepare for. And I want to be very clear that it has to be a specific diagnosis of a learning disability, not anxiety, not autism, not, what are some other ones I've seen? I've seen some like mental health concerns mostly, but that does not excuse them from the requirement at the college level. So if they're planning on applying to college, be very careful. Ask the guidance counselor to look up the Massachusetts admissions guide. Okay, next, please. Questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to hand it back to Julie, and I think she's going to throw out some questions at us too.
Yes, and Sarah, there is one question based on some of what you covered. Are accommodations set for all courses, or are they based on an individual course?
I think that's a practice that differs from school to school. So we don't do it for specific courses. We give and it's because students don't necessarily know what's going to happen in that course. So at our school, we write out what the accommodations are, and they may or may not choose to use an accommodation for a specific course.
Great. Well, you know, from getting to know all of you a little bit this year, I've been very encouraged with all of what you just spoke about and all of the different resources and services on your campuses for students. So I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit and talk about some of the interactions you've had with students and some of the programs that you have that help students make that transition. And I might start with you, Cindy. I know that at MCLA, you have a program that allows students to start a little early when they're coming in, and then we can hear from Caitlin and Jenna too.
Sure. I can talk for a couple of minutes about, it's a fairly new program that we brought into MCLA last fall. And it's called the Start Strong Academy. It actually, it was last fall, and we used some Title III money to fund it. And so what it does is it offers a pre-college experience for freshman students that are coming into the college that may have some concerns about the transition. And for 2 days, we spend 2 days before students actually arrive on campus into housing, and we spend 2 days kind of looking at those challenges, those typical challenges. And some of that involves becoming familiar with the lay of the land. We visit some different offices on campus, and we designed it in a deliberate way that it requires students to use the resources in those places that we spend time in. So for instance, we're in the library, we might actually check a book out. We might actually apply for a library card. So we're actually doing some tasks in the library. We meet with a librarian. We actually play a game of Library Jeopardy in there to get familiar with where things are. There's 3 stories to our library, and where special archives are, and where this materials that cannot be checked out of the library are kept. So we orient students to spaces, important spaces on the campus. We come together as a cohort. So then we begin to develop relationships, and kind of, it doesn't feel so lonely. College doesn't feel, a lot of times students are coming and they've left friendships and families behind, and they're coming and everything is new. So this is a nice way to identify with a group of like students who are feeling some of the same apprehensions and challenges. So together we move through the 2 days together as a cohort, and then we have opportunities during the year to bring that cohort back back together. In fact, when we break in the between these fall and spring semesters, we have a winter one-day academy. We bring everybody back and we rejoice over the finishing of a semester, and we kind of regroup around additional challenges or challenges that have come up that maybe the academy didn't plan for. And so that's pretty much the gist. So right now we're recruiting. We have the capacity for about 50 students for the fall. And this year's theme is a road trip, so it's quite fun. There's always a theme. And this is, heading down the highway, looking for adventure. We play that song. Our video is on our website, MCLA website. Our itinerary will be in a road map with a car, students, and they'll actually have a passport that they have to go to place to place to place. So it's really quite a lot of fun too. And at the same time, we get at some of those study skills and study habits and just general readiness for college. It really is a lot of fun, and it gives me a big advantage because I can begin to develop really important relationships with students, that are going to be important throughout the school year. So it's really been highly successful and looking forward to doing it. Our planning is underway for this fall.
It just sounds so terrific, and I can imagine that really, really helps with that transition. As I turn it to you, Caitlin and Jenna, one other, we have a question from someone that maybe you can kind of embed in your answer about what you offered to students. And that question is, how do I encourage my student to take advantage of all of the services, right? So I like, Cindy, they come in and they have it. So if there's not something like that pre-college, in your comments, if you can just address how do we encourage students to take advantage of all that's available? And or Caitlin, I'll share, and then Jenna next.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think the first step is just to encourage them to connect with disability services. Just start there. You can go on the college's website and you can find the email or the phone number of the person who you should contact, and just start there. And I've been talking a lot with students that are starting in the fall already. They've reached out. And we do talk a lot about accommodations and, maybe what they've had in the past or what they're looking for in the future. But a lot of what we talk about too are the other resources on campus. Because I feel like when students hear about everything else that we have to offer, that colleges have to offer, it kind of eases that anxiety a little bit, and that, being a little nervous about the transition to college. And then once we sort of have that first conversation, they have the person to contact. If they, later as the school year starts, if they're like, I remember hearing about that resource, but I don't really know how to get back in touch with them, they can come back to me, or they can come back to that first person and we can put them in touch. So instead of sort of looking at the big picture, like how do I find out everything that's available at the college? I think it helps a lot to find that one person that you can start with, start that relationship, and then that person can help you get to wherever else you need to be. So, reaching out sooner the better, I think, before everybody gets into summer mode and kind of checks out of the education thing. And that way too, if updated documentation if we do have to go down that road, there's time to do that, time to sort of put accommodations in place and set up. And I feel that when I have talked to students, they just feel a little calmer after that conversation, that they sort of have a direction and, it's not completely brand new anymore. They have a starting point and can kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said, Caitlin. I think having an individual to connect with instead of an office name or like here's a brochure or a handbook makes a huge difference. At Bridgewater State, like you said, we are already connecting with lots of students who are planning on joining us in the fall. We also have a program similar to what Cindy described. We revamped it. So previously it was called the Pre-College Workshop, and now it is the Early Access Workshop, where ACCESS stands for Adapting to College, Creating Empowered, Successful Students. So we'll be sending out information about that. I love acronyms. It's totally my thing. And then in addition to that, we have our peer mentor program, which links into that individual contact. So, you know, sometimes it's intimidating to get connected with the director of our office, right? But we have students, generally those who are sophomores, juniors, or seniors that have been at Bridgewater and successfully navigated the university experience in the context of their diagnosis. And they pair up with new students, primarily first-year students. We do have some exceptions to that, of course, just to help people acclimate, right? And so sometimes that's even more valuable as far as getting the student to connect with the right resources, use the right resources, identify those resources. So it's another thing that we offer as well.
Oh, that's great. Yes, Sarah.
Yes, I want to add that many of our universities have some sort of federally funded TRIO program, so student support program, and they're saying, yes, get the student connected with one person, but how are you going to get that student connected to one person? That I think is sometimes harder. I got 4 Ds my first semester in college, and it's because I didn't ask for help. It's because I didn't know that I had to study, many different reasons. And I know that if I had a program like our Learning Disabilities program or our TRIO Student Support Services program, the TRIO one is, I think, is at all college. You have one too, right, Jen and Cindy? Yes. So
Yes.
find that program. They're supposed to support students who have a diagnosed disability or are
First generation.
low income. Low income and at our college means that you receive some sort of financial aid, or our first generation college students. And it is so important that someone gives your daughter some tough love at this point. If she's been there a semester, a full year, and she is not going in to ask for accommodations, I think I would hold a hand for this one and have her apply to this program and get her in that first meeting so that somebody can say, these are your responsibilities, and talk to the person beforehand. So these are the challenges I am having with my daughter. She's not taking that first step. She's not taking the initiative. The other alternative, and I know this sounds dire, is she's going to fall on her face and she is going to get some bad grades. I got 4 Ds, I said, and people come back from it. Sometimes they get what I call an academic slap in the face. Sorry for the violence, but sometimes people need that in order to get moving. So that is my opinion. I've seen people do it very easily, and then some people have to boom, fall down and back up.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's funny. I was going to ask for your own personal kind of wisdom and help, because there is a parent who wrote in here talking about how even though her student is a freshman and her self-advocacy is evolving, she's still sort of, I think it's a she, let's say, expecting a situation more like in high school, waiting to be told and having, she's taking a little longer to fully self-advocate. So the tough love thing and being stronger is good advice. Any other thoughts on that from your experience with students about words of wisdom to maybe say to a student who seems to be struggling with that piece?
I think Sarah nailed it, really. I mean, it's so hard because it is a massive shift. I think that if you have the opportunity to start enhancing your soon to be adult child's self-advocacy skills now while they're still in high school, that's going to be key. Empowering your student to, one, know that they have a diagnosis that impacts them, right? to be able to name that diagnosis and discuss how it impacts them, and to involve them in their IEP, their 504, that starts planting the seed of that self-directedness. And I think it's an opportunity that is missed a lot of times because that's just not how the system is currently set up, right? But that makes that like cliff feeling when you go to college, university, and it suddenly does become completely yours. So start building those skills on a smaller basis now, as soon as possible and as frequently as possible.
Oh, that's great. And someone mentioned that the registration process can be very stressful. Any thoughts on that for students?
So we're one of the schools that does not automatically approve students that are utilizing our services for priority registration or some kind of equivalent. We do have accommodated registration, and there are a couple of different categories for accommodated registration. So as an example, if a student physically cannot complete the registration process due to their diagnosis, or they're facing barriers to be able to complete it in a manner that's equitable to that of their peers. So a student who maybe uses a screen reading technology, and by using a screen reading technology and then speech to text to fill out forms online, they're getting delayed in their process, and even 5 minutes makes a huge difference selecting classes sometimes. So that's a student that we would accommodate and work with to make sure that they're not being disadvantaged by their diagnosis, right? Um, but we know that there are a ton of other students who get really stressed out, and it's a very activating time for them. So while we do not necessarily allow them to register early, we offer different opportunities with our peer mentors actually to get that kind of additional insight, things to consider about scheduling your classes. So if you are somebody who generally receives time and a half on an exam, don't take a bunch of 50-minute classes back to back, because when you have an exam, you're going to be late for the next class. To try to kind of draft out a schedule like that and ease some of that through our specific program that we offer for that topic area.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I also wondered, this is sort of changing topic here for a moment. Cindy, could you speak a little bit about the Mass Rehabilitation Commission and how they serve students and how students can access those?
Sure. So I've been gone quite a number of years, but I can certainly speak to, 666, which is 688. Sarah, here I go. So I can talk about the state law 688, which, really provides for transition services. And I guess that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that shift from, public schools to adulthood. And so there is this law that if students are eligible, guarantees them transition services, I believe from the age of 14 right up to age 22. And so they used to call that in my day turning 22 funds. I'm not sure that they'd call that anymore, but generally how a 688 referral is done is during an IEP meeting. So a student is in, their first year of high school or second year of high school, and they begin to talk about the services, transition services that are available. And they talk about the different agencies that provide 688 services, like Mass Rehab is just one of those agencies. The Department of Developmental Services is another one. The Mass Commission for the Blind, the Mass Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is another agency that provides services. And so that all begins, that referral is made at that time. It can be made as early as 14 because there are transition services that are available to students that have that qualify, that are around. They could be summer work, they could be interviewing, they could be job clubs, they could be a whole mirage of services that are available through these different agencies that students who are eligible for 688 services could take advantage of.
That's terrific. Thank
Is
you.
is that helpful?
Very, very. And actually, so Caitlin, I'll ask you this, and everyone can also chime in. We get a lot of questions from parents and students, well, mostly from parents, about kind of the admissions process early on, how to think about going about this. And so, do you have any thoughts about the college search process? Maybe what a parent and a student can be doing early on as they begin thinking about their process of next step and a transition?
Yeah, I think it's good to do the research. All colleges will have, well, all public colleges will have the Disability Services Office, but there may be different services that they offer, or different, specific programs that they offer, like a learning disabilities program. So the first step, I think, would just be to maybe reach out or search their websites to see what they have to offer. If you're looking for something specific, you can even just Google that program or Google some keywords and see which schools come up. And then you can start to kind of narrow in on some schools that look like good fits for the student. And then, reach out and talk to someone, whether they're in disability services or whether they're in admissions. That's always a good place to start too, and they can sort of get you to where you need to be. And then, once things start to open back up, take a visit to that school and to really see. I feel like, I know when, a million years ago when I was doing my college search process, you can just kind of tell when you're on campus. You sort of get a feel for the atmosphere and, the size and that type of thing. Sometimes you don't really realize the size until you're there. So just to visit. And then while you're there, you can set up an appointment with somebody in disability services or in admissions, or a specific program trio, a specific program that you want to look into, and just start talking to people. I think you can also get a good sense of a good fit as far as who you're talking with, and that they're there for you, and that there's somebody on that campus that you can connect with, and start that relationship with. So I think a lot of it, is starting small with a little bit of research, and then kind of growing a list, looking at the specifics of that school, and then starting to narrow it down.
That's great. That's great.
Can I add to that just for a second? One thing that I have done with prospective students is I've asked them to take a week and write down all the things that have been helpful for you in high school. So, and think about your living situation at home too. So we've had a lot of students who have food particularities, or their family has allowed them to use one bathroom and they're the only person who uses that bathroom. So the things that have been helpful, the things that you're used to doing. And is that going to be possible in college? Right? You having your only bathroom is not going to be possible at all colleges. You might be able to have it by yourself at that time, but somebody else might also be using it. So there are lots of little things. We had twins. I met twins who were both deaf, and their school had reconstructed the ceilings so that the sound wasn't reverberating. Very likely not going to happen in a college. So all these things, or it could be something as simple as I got to meet with somebody every single day for 10 minutes to check in. And that's very likely not going to happen too. So unless you get like a peer mentor, but it might be less frequently.
Yes.
So
that's one good thing to prepare, is to write down everything that you're used to getting that helps you out.
Very, very
I think
good.
also one quick thing to add in there too is, as you're engaging with these offices to try to figure out if it has the right resources, it's important to note that most, if not all, of these offices will not commit to specific accommodations that your adult child will receive. My office, for example, we don't finalize any accommodations until the student is fully registered for courses. I can tell you whether or not we offer certain accommodations frequently. but I can't say, oh yeah, for sure, with this diagnosis, you'll definitely get this, this, and this. And I think a lot of people want to know that, and I understand why. It's just not something that we can do.
Very helpful. And I wonder how you would address this. Oh, and someone might have answered it, but I'll ask it out loud as well. What would you say about a student or parents who are afraid to contact the college because they're afraid that knowledge of their disability will hurt their chances of admissions?
Go, Sarah, go.
And my first response is it's illegal for people to consider disability in the admissions decisions. My second response is to reiterate and emphasize that our offices are not going to call up admissions and say, oh my goodness, Joe has this. We're not going to do that. That's not our role. It's not our purpose. Our purpose is to support you. And it's illegal for them to do that. The exceptions to the illegality of that is if the student self-identifies to admissions that they have a condition. And students who want waivers of the SAT or of the foreign language waiver, they must self-identify that aspect. I know, and I'm pretty sure in general, I mean, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I think offices of admissions were more likely to discriminate unconsciously, I will say, like long time ago. But I think now, especially in the Massachusetts state admissions, that they all have to deal with issues of disability because of those waivers, and they see people coming in with like, 2% reading fluency rate, and they see them on the dean's list later. And people, because we have so many more students with disabilities in college succeeding, because they're getting their supports,
Right.
that is, it's less of an issue. And our college, 1/4 of the students of the student body has some sort of disability, or at least has told us they have a disability. So there are more and more students in college now. I say bite the bullet, call the Office of Disability Services, see what sorts of things they offer. You do not have to tell admissions at all. If they ask, you do not have to tell admissions. That's how I feel about it.
No.
And actually, we have a question. Does MRC, Mass Rehabilitation Commission, help with the college transition?
So I think, I think there's a lot of transition services that are available between for the time that our 688 referral is made to Mass Rehab and maybe the time that a student enters college. Let me tell you a little bit about some of those. Might be like, I remember a program that was developed through the Mass Commission for the Blind, where students in their junior year of high school actually were able to go out and go into companies and explore and shadow jobs that were in industry that folks had been successful with who were either blind or low vision. And so that was a real eye-opener for a lot of students who didn't quite see themselves in the traditional workforce, that there were people in the fields, in various fields, occupations, doing work that were either blind or low vision. And so students were exposed to those careers. That's an activity that happens through the transition, those transition years. So each state agency, the Mass Rehab Commission, has a pre-ETS program, and that's new since I've left the commission. And that actually begins to expose youth to careers and occupations through internships, through summer employment, through job shadowing. They have an annual job shadowing day. So I think there's a lot of activities. So I think there's a lot of good reasons to do a 688 referral to Mass Rehab or to the Mass Commission, whatever is the appropriate agency to do a referral to. Definitely. Not to mention, once if a student makes a decision to go on to college, they can help with funding if a family is eligible. They can help with, I've requested assistive technology assessments for students that have come through disability resources, and I just don't know what the student needs. I don't have a staff on board who has those qualifications. And so I've asked Mass Rehab to pay for that. So Mass Rehab has been wonderful. They've provided, they've helped purchase smart pens and software for students and computers. So I think it's behooves families to reach out to those to exercise their rights under the special ed laws under 688 services. Yeah, under that law. Would you agree with me, Sarah?
Yes, I do. And I just also want to add that many high schools are now actually looking into transition services. It's part of the IEP. It's at the last year or so, or the second to last year. If no one mentions transition services to you, bring it up. Say,
Yes.
I heard that the IEP now has a portion that we fill out about transitioning, and it's transitioning to education, it's transitioning to living, it's transitioning to the employment world, and that's part of the IEP. So take advantage of it, push them to do it,
Yes.
and look into what you can do. And that's, I kind of wonder sometimes if people are trying to get students off of IEPs and onto 504s and saying that's how you're going to transition to college. My question is, well, if you're on a 504, you're not getting any more services.
That's right.
You're not getting anybody to tell you or show you or work with you on how to develop your note-taking skills.
Right.
There are very few students who come to college with note-taking skills. And note-taking is not just sitting in class and taking notes in class. Note-taking is having a book and learning how to mark the book up, or learning how to write out, the gist of that paragraph so that you're processing that information and learning that information. Who is teaching them that?
Right.
And just to mention, I'll mention, because I know there's a lead time for the 688. People, if they're interested in doing it, definitely start thinking about that in junior year or so. I know you don't want to wait till the last minute on that, because there is a lead time with the orgs to get that in place.
And just to emphasize, it has to be requested in high school.
Yes. Yes. Very important. Yeah.
I think it's age 14, isn't it, Mary and Sarah? I think I read it was age 14 they had to be.
Yeah, and I just know there is that lead time. Like, you don't want to wait till you're in your senior year to request it, because I know there can be I think if you go to the actual mass.gov site or MRC, I think it's potentially like a 1.5 year lead time to get that in place.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's funny. We have a question here. This person says they were so excited to learn that a student could have a note taker. That was amazing. How do we know about all of the things we could ask for? And one thing, we're going to send you this presentation tomorrow, so you'll have a list from Sarah's PowerPoint slides. Do you have things in your offices, lists of accommodations, or how would someone just know everything that could be available?
So I'm gonna hop in and say, even we don't know everything that could be available.
Yeah.
Right. So the way that accommodations generally work is we talk to the student about what barriers they're facing, right? And then based on the barriers they're facing and how those may impact them in the courses that they've selected, in the activities that they want to, participate in on campus, that's where we come up with the accommodations, right? And so some of them are really common, 1.5 times on tests. I could not even guess how many students at Bridgewater State University have 1.5 times on tests and exams. Really, really common. A note taker, less common, still something that exists. We've got some really creative accommodations that have been used once ever and may never be used again because it was tailored specifically to the unique needs of that student.
Yes.
So from my perspective, it's less about asking for specific accommodations and more about being able to dialogue about what struggles you have and what's kind of worked in the past, right?
That's terrific. Yeah.
I think our goal is to, I know that our goal is to ensure that you have access, right? If it's not reasonable, of course, but ensure that you have access. And I think that is one thing that makes our job extra special and extra fun and extra interesting, is that we get to first help a student succeed, provide that platform for them, but we also get to use our minds and be creative. So I don't know an unhappy disability services provider, because our jobs are so fulfilling, but it's because we get to work with students and your adult children. And so
Yes.
just know that most
so
of us
fabulous.
are too welcoming.
And Caitlin, I'm sure you have, I can see you smiling there. I'm sure you have people come into you and you explore it together. Is that how it works with your students as well?
Yeah, I agree with everything that they've said. I often tell students too, you might not know what questions you have right now until you get into the class and in the, that specific classroom or anything like that. But I always tell them to just reach out if there's something that you're struggling with and, you're thinking, I don't even know if this is an accommodation. I bet they can't do anything about it. Just ask, because there might be something that we can do, to implement so that, that struggle becomes a little less burdensome. So it can't hurt to ask. And I tell students too that the accommodation process, sometimes in K-12, if the IEP is put in place, it's sort of set, for that year. But in college, if needed, we can kind of tweak things a little bit, once they get into classes and see how it goes. So just to stay in communication with the office and to always ask if they have a question or if there's something they just want to talk about.
It's great advice. And I think we're going to wind down here. I will just share. I know that all of you see a lot of success, and that is probably why, as you say, you love your jobs. And this one participant offered a story of success that her daughter, who seems to have embraced self-advocacy, she emails each of her professors before class begins and lets them know that she has panic attacks sometimes, and she's received all kinds of wonderful support and different kinds of support and accommodations from different professors. So by speaking up, she has had a good experience with that. So I think that's nice to know.
Yes. Yeah, I think we saw a lot of that with COVID, right? With students really struggling and having to reach out to faculty more about maybe assignment deadlines or comprehending, understanding assignments, clarification because of COVID and because of distance learning, the changes. And so I think, I've seen here at this school, students doing more of that, connecting with faculty. And we address that in our Start Strong Academy. I think that's critical to be able to do that. And I think for students who are managing medical conditions similar, that if they can get ahead, if they can have that conversation, preface that semester by, I may be absent, I may fall behind, what they have might be exacerbated by certain things. I think having that conversation up front, kind of lays out a plan for negotiating those bumps when they do arise. So I'm all about that. I think that's wonderful when students reach out in advance of their reading materials I can get ahead of. Is there a paper I could get started on? So if I find myself in those throes, I don't fall behind, right? Anytime we can be proactive, I think, and if we can help our students to know how valuable that is, what a nice position that puts them in to come from that place.
It's fabulous.
What,
Well,
one
I
thing
wanna-
sorry.
Go ahead. No, finish off, Mary. That's great.
I was just going to say one thing I think is an important takeaway, and I think Sarah touched on this, is that this whole journey in college, right, is kind of a journey, and there may be bumps in the road, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
kids may get derailed. And I actually, even as a parent, am a big proponent of, sometimes, those bumps and hiccups help you to get to a better place. And I know there's programs for kids that sometimes leave school, and take a break or take a semester or two off, and then do a program and kind of get back in, and then that can help them to be more focused. I was just curious if I know there's some programs locally that offer that, kind of take a semester off and kind of regroup on some tools they need to work on, what your thoughts are around that.
BU has some good programs, and I
Yes.
think there is some financial aid available because BU costs money. But I know at least one student has gone through their program who had severe mental health concerns, and it was just so helpful.
Yeah, there's Nateo at BU, right? And I was
So,
thinking
yes.
Nateo, and then I was thinking semester off is another one that I know locally that helps kids to,
And Landmark College, fabulous. They have more funding for I was just looking into this, more support for the academic year than they do for the summer. But if you want your student to be a self-advocate and know how to study, they need to go to Landmark College.
Yes.
Basically. And they take students who are have ADHD and LD or on the autism spectrum.
Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate your expertise, and thank you participants for all of the great questions, and we will continue this conversation as we move forward, and good luck to all, and have a nice afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for
you.
doing this.
Thank
This was
you.
great. Thank you. Take care.